thank you very much for having me. I'm really looking forward to learning as much as I can about the work that you all do. As was mentioned, I'm Managing Director at Draper Richards Kaplan. Just a bit of an overview about DRK. We are a venture philanthropy organization. And what that means is that we are able to deploy capital in both for both grants and for impact investing. And when I say impact investing, I mean capital that can be used for generating financial return as well as social return. So we do both things. And I'm here on the invitation of IMAP, and we are very much looking forward to understanding more about the region. We're driven by what I would call impact at scale. We support organizations that want to execute impact at scale and solve global problems. By background, I'm originally from Kenya, but I'm based out of London now, and my primary responsibility at DRK is to fundraise as well as build the portfolio in Western Europe and in Africa. So just to give you an overview of what I would like us to do today, this is really a taste presentation. It's very difficult to do this in 25 minutes. I'll just put this in my timer so that I don't overstep the time. That can happen very easily. And what I'm going to try and do today is give you all an idea of what an non-governmental organization or a humanitarian organization in your country could do to approach private investors or impact investors in order to grow and scale. So I've taught this course in a couple of universities previously and found that it's such an important sort of guidance tool for humanitarian organizations and for NGOs to understand just how can they approach private capital in order to grow. Here I have a bit of a quote from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation about the power of the private sector to deliver improved health and sanitation benefits. I'll just let you read that, and I'll go to the next slide. Okay, so I wanted us to do a poll, if it's possible, just to understand if any of you are planning to approach private sector capital or form partnerships in the next 12 to 18 months. I wanted to understand, just so that for my own purposes, I know who is about to have these conversations. So is it possible to do that or not?
Sí, claro que sí, ya deberían estar viendo el poll en sus pantallas.
Okay, how will I see it? Oh yeah, here we go, great.
Entonces, los asistentes en la llamada, vemos que son 5, por favor, contestar. Hasta el momento, la respuesta es sí, Cali.
For all 5. Perfect, great. Excellent. Okay, so I'll go to the next slide. So if you're going to have a conversation with the private sector, what I like to start off with is to say that you bring a very huge, important value proposition. And when I talk about a value proposition, what I mean is that even though you are a humanitarian organization, nonprofit, there's so much important work that you have done and experience that you have gained that puts you in an excellent position to be able to have this conversation. So I'm going to go through 4 benefits that I believe you bring to the table in terms of approaching the private sector. The first one is you have on the ground global and local scale and presence and you understand the context that you work in. Now, if I was to come as a private investor to Colombia, I would not have any idea about the local context. But you bring that context with all your work and with your on-the-ground presence. This is something that impact investors and private capital really value. Because if they're outside Latin America, if they are in Europe, if they're in America, they really want to deal with a local partner like you who knows your way around and you understand the local context. So that's a huge advantage that you bring to the table. The second thing is you're already doing quite a lot of programming. So you have programs with existing funders, family foundations such as DRK, such as USAID, that bring you credibility already, even before you start to look at impact investors. That is a very important quality and an important value proposition. So when you sit down with a private sector person or an impact investor, talk about those programs that you're doing, talk about your existing funders, even if they are philanthropic contributors to your work. That's really, really important because that gives you credibility as well. The third value proposition that you bring is that your mission already focuses on solving complex social problems. I mentioned before that DRK funds organizations that are solving complex social problems in the world, such as you know, migration is a big issue in your context, poverty, huge issue, inequality, health, sanitation, all those complex problems, you're already solving them in your work as an NGO. An impact investor has exactly the same purpose, to help solve these problems, but the only difference is that they're using private capital to do it, and they expect a social return and they expect a financial return from it. And lastly, the other value proposition that you bring is that you understand the public and the private sector. I'm sure a lot of you have worked with your local governments to deliver your programs, and you've been able to blend that relationship and that knowledge with private sources of capital, such as DRK funding, other family foundations that are found locally. So when you come to an impact investor, a lot of you largely already understand how to work with the government, and that's a very important way to scale your impact. At DRK, we always like to see, we're very excited about organizations that come to us and say, we already have a partnership with the Ministry of Health, we already have a partnership with the Ministry of Migration, we already have a partnership that is existing, our programs have been accepted by government, and the government is helping us scale. We really value that. So don't, okay. So the main reason is actually to, a number of people, I'll just give you, on other courses that I've done, most people pick the third option, which is to follow what others are doing, which, you know, kind of makes sense. But the answer is actually the number 4. So there was research done in 2019 with NGOs asking them why they're speaking to the private sector, and it's really to explore and pilot new models for their own operations, which is great because it's not just about getting more money, it's about creating new models for how they operate and experimenting. So working with the private sector as a partner rather than just a source of funding. I just thought that was an interesting sort of survey result to share. Okay, so I'm halfway done. So these are strategies that we can think about as NGOs when we receive private capital or impact investing capital. And there are 3 main ones as an NGO that you could implement in your own local organizations. The first one is the provision of technical assistance. And what I mean by technical assistance is flexible provision of grants. So you could onward grant the money that you raise from the private sector to help other social enterprises to grow or scale in the sector that you're working in. This is something that I've seen quite a number of organizations do. They're usually larger in size than some of you are. They're not local grassroots organizations. They're usually at the international INGO level. The onward grant to support social enterprises to then program in specific areas to solve problems. The other area that you could consider is to invest yourselves directly into a smaller SME, which is a small and medium-sized fund. I don't think that's very applicable to what you're doing, again, because a lot of you are grassroots. But I'll give you an example. I don't know if you know Mercy Corps. Mercy Corps is an international humanitarian NGO that has now set up Mercy Corps Ventures. And Mercy Corps Ventures now invests directly in smaller, medium-sized enterprises who are focused on doing something specific in the humanitarian sector. So, of course, Mercy Corps is very large, but I think that's a really good example of how you can move from being humanitarian to deciding to invest in organizations that are doing something similar, but will then have additional impact to the one that you yourself are generating. It's a fascinating story, Mercy Corps. And then the last thing you could think about is using the funds that you raise to build your ecosystem. And building the ecosystem can be many things. It can be setting up an accelerator. It can be training individuals or organizations to do something very specific. If you are in the migration sector, what could you do in your ecosystem building? You could support service providers within the ecosystem who are helping migrants to integrate into the country once they come in. It could be supporting government. The government is a significant ecosystem player when you think about the work that we're all involved in. So you could actually use capital, grant capital in this instance, to support government in terms of creating outcomes in the area that you're working in. So these are just 3 strategies that we as impact investors would be interested in hearing from you if you came to us to raise capital or have a conversation. I'm going to pause there again and see if there are any questions in the chat. Okay, so there's 2 minutes left, 1 minute left in the session. Okay, so, right, I will have to go very quickly. I will go to this slide. I'm going to the slide, which is what sectors are INGOs focusing on for their impact investing. Just want to go through that, and then the slide after. So this is really to show you the sectors that NGOs are moving into for their impact investing or for their conversations with private partners. The most common one is livelihoods. So anything around poverty alleviation, that is also migrants as well, that 56%, and sustainable agriculture. Those are the 2 most common sectors for INGOs who are already doing that work, who then are able to approach private sector partners for partnerships or to raise capital. And then this is a good slide for you to see globally I'm on the next slide, NGOs partnering effectively to the transition. These are examples of organizations around the world that have been humanitarian and are now partnering effectively with the private sector and impact investors. Okay, I'm just going to finish with failures. I don't know how much time I have. I'm going to go down, just go to the next page, go to the next slide. Next. Yeah, I already went through that slide. Yes, I've just talked about that slide. Go, next one. Yeah, failures. Let me just go to failures quickly. So the failures that we're seeing where INGOs or humanitarian organizations are not able to effectively partner with the private sector are mainly poor stakeholder buy-in is one of the things that make these things, the conversations difficult. And when I say stakeholder buy-in, I mean internally within your NGO, make sure that everyone around the table understands why you want to go to the private sector, understands why you want to have a conversation with impact investors. That's the first thing. If you don't do that well, there will be a failure in terms of the success of the strategies. The other thing is internal capacity. If internally your staff don't really understand well the importance of the private sector, there will be a failure, because you'll be talking to the private sector, but internally that experience is not there. So it will create a roadblock in terms of developing scale and success. And then the other thing is legal barriers could also prevent effective communication and partnership with the private sector. For example, if your country doesn't has regulations around an NGO receiving private capital, that may be one of the reasons why this conversation or strategy may fail. So I think I'd just like to finish with understanding from all of you, from all 5 of you, what are you going to do differently after this session? And I'd like everybody just to type in before we leave the room.